and we'll have some time for question and answer.
Sure.
And we'll also then have some time to do some breakout rooms where we can have some more long form discussion. And so if you want to stick around for that, you're more than welcome to do so. And, you know, hopefully we can get some things out of that. That's an opportunity as well for our community to kind of just hang out a little bit, get to know each other a little bit more deeply, and have discussions about kind of open source medical tech and the future of medical hardware. So
yeah, absolutely.
Now that we're, pardon. Now that we're all here, Philip has joined as well. So I wanted to kind of formally commence the meeting. I think people might continue to roll in, but we are live streaming to Facebook and recording. So I think we can get rolling on this. Welcome to another edition of the Cosmic Medical Monthly Symposium. This is an opportunity for Cosmic Medical, the collective open source medical innovations for COVID-19, our community to get together, give project updates on the engineering developments that are progressing and also the business developments that are progressing. And for us to have, you know, we're joined by a wonderful speaker. We always have a very interesting guest who shines a light on another aspect of this big puzzle that we're all working on together. So really excited to be joined by Marc Jones today, US attorney and a free software advocate. We'll get to his full bio after we do the project updates. So I would like to commence this though with a brief question for Philip. And I see Robert Reed has joined. I'm glad that we kind of found this after some technical difficulties, a few of them. So I'm glad we're all here. But Philip, I just wanted to ask you, you know, why would contributors want to join and contribute and volunteer their time to the work that Cosmic is doing?
Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate the question, and hi to Mark and Robert. In terms of why people would want to volunteer at Cosmic, I think it's all about working on a challenge, a grand challenge in the medical space, which can have global impact, as well as an opportunity to be part of a very active community and to take on new opportunities and upskill and try and figure out where you can learn and contribute to these kind of problems.
Amazing. I think the upskilling is actually a really interesting one. That is a reason a lot of contributors stick around with Cosmic is, you know, there's so much to learn here. We're so open about the knowledge, and what I find is whenever I work on a team, I might be bringing one skill, but I tend to learn from all these other skills that the other contributors have. So I love that aspect. Of course, the grand challenges are what bring us all together. I wanted to ask if everyone can turn on their camera and we can do a quick wave. We can take a photo of this month's attendees at the conference. I see we have some new faces from some new contributors that have joined the project recently. So we're really glad to have you all here. And also some veteran contributors as well. So Bruce and Glenn and Alex, people, Abhijit, who have really been here from day one, many of them. So it's wonderful to see you all here. And Peter, if you don't mind just taking a screenshot, then on the count of 3, we can all wave to the camera a little bit, say hi. Perfect. And maybe one more. All right. Good. Great. All right. And let's move straight into the project announcements. So Alex, if you don't mind starting us off with Gvent. We'll get the project updates. You might need screen sharing.
Yeah, for sure. Everyone see this okay? Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks, Patrick. So this will be a quick, brief update on what the Gvent team's been up to lately and what we're looking forward to doing in the future. So for those who haven't seen it before, the Gvent is our low-cost gravity ventilator design that is based on this water column and 2 inverted cylinders to generate the constant air pressure that's needed for patients suffering from ARDS. And we believe it's a uniquely affordable design to build in terms of low-cost ventilators, especially compared to some of the other emergency ventilators that are currently available. So a couple of brief project updates. What we've been working on in the past few weeks has been less on the technical side and more on just the compilation of our requirements. And we've been putting them down and putting them all into Markdown files and getting them integrated into our GitHub page. We've also made some first steps to setting up a remote SSH with a Raspberry Pi to allow some contributors who aren't around the actual gvent to still push their code to it and see their changes in real time, which is exciting. And our upcoming plans, we plan to try to package the gravity air drive, which is kind of the tank part of the ventilator, as a separate project or module. So it can be used in other types of projects like CPAP and BiPAP. So we believe that the true unique part of the gravity ventilator is the air pump drive. So we'd like to see it ported to other types of medical devices that could make use of that unique geometry. And we think that the simple air drive can be interfaced with VentOS and VentMon, which in the future will provide a certified control platform for ventilation, clinical control, and alarm functionality. So those are some of our ideas of where we're going in the future, and I believe that's all.
Thanks, Alex. You know, and Robert Reed is here. You know, he's the creator of Public Invention, who was the organization that actually made the VentMon. Look at he's holding up the VentMon. That's the latest, greatest version. I have an earlier version in my room right now that we've been working with, but it's a really useful, and I think, you know, in that VentMon library also, there's a really important conceptualization of sort of how a product gets to market. And I like this direction for gvent because I think turning our work into more tightly contained modules is going to make it easier to add those modules together to create complex functionality. So I'm hoping for this direction. You know, I think it's a worthwhile direction for us at gvent, and it also then leverages and works with some of these other open source design communities like Helpful Engineering that's making the VentOS. So great to hear that. Let's move on to the oxygen concentrator. If you would like to provide a brief update. I think that's going to be Bruce.
So the oxygen concentrator project is the idea is to design an oxygen concentrator which can be built close to the point of use from simple materials and make it rugged enough to survive the stress of working in a low maintenance, harsh environment. So we're making progress, we're assembling things, we have a prototype, we have actually made some oxygen. We're not ready for prime time, but we're making steady progress and physically meeting once a week to bang things together and take measurements. There we go.
That's fantastic. I was also part of a meeting today where Bruce and Abhijit, did you want to talk about a little bit about those meetings that have been happening?
Yeah,
an interesting aspect.
We've got on board. It's called a CoLab. It's a worldwide kind of weekly or bi-weekly symposium of people who are interested in trying to make oxygen concentrators work better in low resource areas. But the technology has been around for half a century, and you'd think that there would be no need or the need would have been satisfied. But in fact, the developing world is littered with graveyards of oxygen concentrators that break down and get thrown out because the ability to repair them is not available in developing countries. There's a whole bunch of issues with humidity, dust, temperature, electrical supply that is just really hard on this kind of machinery. So this symposium gets together and discusses issues to try to focus everyone for solving them, because there is a worldwide need for more medical oxygen. There's about 500,000 children that die each year of pneumonia, and the vast majority of them don't have access to reliable oxygen supplies. So we're, even if COVID is defeated with vaccines, there will still be an unanswered need for medical oxygen, which predates COVID.
Thank you, Bruce. I think that those meetings, and your contributions to those meetings, I know have been really valuable. The organizers of them mentioned a number of times at the meeting today, just how valuable the insights coming from Cosmic were, but also we're learning so much from that consortium too, just in terms of the on the ground needs and the limitations. So I think that that's wonderful, and that goes to show that the work that we're doing here, it really is breaking boundaries, right? Even if it's on the level of deeply understanding the needs of different contexts, right? And not necessarily, and then adapting the technology to suit those. One of the things you mentioned as well there that I wanted to dive into a little bit is the repairability aspect. So one of the beautiful things of open source plans is that if you can access all of the information about all the different levels of a device that you're working with, you can potentially people around you or you can repair devices more availably, right? Rather than devices that kind of have secret sauce that are harder to understand or hidden from view. So great to hear that. So unfortunately, I did hear from Arpan just now that he has had to work late, and so he was unable to give the updates. But I would love if Abhijit, would you like to step in and give a brief update about the bubble helmet and the OxCon? Maybe you and Phil can kind of jointly give a brief update about, there were some successes, especially in terms of funding this month. So I would love to give that update to the Cosmic community.
Yeah, I'll talk about some of the fundings we have received for oxygen concentrator. So we received a grant of PHCRI, which is Providence Healthcare Innovation Fund, and we just received that award a couple of weeks ago. So we're really excited about that. And another award which Phil submitted on our behalf, which is Resident Innovation Fund, and that was for oxygen concentrator as well. So I think we have received one more award for bubble helmet. And so, Philip, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so it's been a very good month in terms of getting recognition for our work more broadly and getting funding to continue the research that we're doing. And so to that end, the two grants that you mentioned were worth $5,000 and $2,500 respectively. And then Dr. Shamisha, who is a member of the bubble helmet team, also submitted a grant to the Resident Doctors of BC Innovation Fund and received $2,500, which will go towards further development of the Cosmic bubble helmet. So we're really pleased about that and have some fuel in the rocket, so to speak, to keep powering the projects that we're doing.
Wonderful. Great to hear all that. I know upcoming this week for Bubble Helmet as well, they have the Health Canada interim order clinical readiness inspection, I believe. So they're going to be the first team in Canada actually to undergo this type of inspection. It's a brand new sort of mechanism, I guess, that the government has put into place, or Health Canada more specifically has put into place in order to just check in with and see how this remote monitoring process is working. So that's really exciting news for Bubble Helmet, and I know they're putting together the finishing touches on a lot of their documentation to get that really ready for that inspection. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Marc Jones. One moment. So Marc Jones is a U.S. attorney, a free software advocate, and a regular speaker on free and open source software legal issues. He's currently the general counsel for Civic Actions, a US-based professional services company whose mission is to help governments improve citizens' lives through modern software and thoughtful experiences. He also continues to provide the pro bono legal services to a select group of free culture charities. In addition to his pro bono work, he serves as a volunteer member or officer at Public Invention, Agile Government Leadership, and Digital Services Coalition. So Marc has worked for 17 years before that as a software an IT architect and manager for the state of Connecticut and staff counsel at the Software Freedom Law Center, where he worked for 5 years. Really excited. So, Marc has this deep knowledge about, free open source software, free software in general, and a real interest in free culture. So I'm really looking forward to this presentation. Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Patrick. So I was mentioning Patrick before, lawyers tend to be long-winded, but I know you guys try to keep these brief, so I'll go quickly. So brief introduction, because I'm a lawyer, so I have to do this. I am a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. None of this is legal advice. No one here is my client. This is just for informational purposes. And then the rest of the introduction Patrick just said. So the request I got from Philip was to talk a little bit about free software, open source software, and bringing those values to the medical device community, specifically around share alike. And I want to talk a little bit about this in the context of values and from a bigger picture from free culture values. So values for free culture in general. I'll talk a little about what I mean by free culture is maximizing user freedom. In the free software world, we talk about free software freedom and user freedoms, like these really big, important ideas that when like people who are deep inside the community and we're orienting around a principle, this is our North Star. And some hallmarks of free culture is giving other people more knowledge, more choices, more resources. That's really what we mean by user freedom, right? The person at the end who ends up with your piece of software, who ends up with the open data, who ends up with the Creative Commons licensed book, they have the freedom to do what they want with it. And they have a lot of choices about what they're going to do with it, right? So we're maximizing their freedom. This is in contrast to like worrying about the freedom for software developers, worrying about the freedom for worrying about freedom for inventors, worrying about the freedom for authors. That's not what free culture is about. It's about providing things to other people. That's the freedom that we're worried about. And that shows up most prominently in what I usually say is no rent seeking. Sometimes it's confusing, but when you get a piece of software like Microsoft Office, you have to pay a software license fee to use that. When you buy a book, you're also getting a license to have a copy of that book. There are restrictions around it. You can only install one copy of Microsoft Office. You can't put it on every computer there. These are restrictions on your freedom. And if you want more rights, you've got to pay more. You've got to pay rent to do that. That's what I mean about no rent seeking. In the free culture world, we're not seeking to collect rents. When we get it in someone's hand, they can do what they want with it. It's just about getting you a copy. We're also creating a commons of knowledge, right? So very often we talk about I think it's pretty common in the English speaking world to think about the tragedy of the commons and what goes wrong with that. Well, the great thing about the free culture world is we're talking about non-exhaustive resources, right? We don't have two cows competing for the same blade of grass. We have ideas, right? So it's a little bit more like a candle, right? Like when one candle lights another candle, it doesn't get diminished. Intellectual property rights are non-exhaustive, right? So we can build these columns these knowledge commons by sharing more, right? The more we share, the bigger the commons becomes. And to the extent that we're talking about intellectual property rights, which is a really illegal term, and if anyone here is sensitive to that term, because I know some people are very politically active in the subject, they object to the idea that ideas can be owned or can be property. That's what lawyers call about it. When intellectual property rights do exist, we're going to use those to encourage sharing, rather than their design purpose of restricting, of giving people knowledge, is where you can say, well, you can't have access to my book unless you pay me a fee. We're going to say, well, I have intellectual property rights around this, and I'm going to use my intellectual property rights to encourage my ideas to get legs so that they go further. And I might be using my intellectual property rights to encourage you to also use your intellectual properties to get your ideas to use legs. So it's not restricting, it's sharing. So some of those are the hallmarks of that, right? We see that in free software, right? I'm going to see free software a lot because I'm talking to a community group. And my assumption is when I'm talking to community groups, individuals here are really motivated about helping others. I really think of this as like a civil rights or civil activism, civil libertarian point of view. I mean the same thing as open source software licensing, which you typically talk about in a commercial context. So when I'm talking to commercial customers, I'll usually say open source. But when I'm talking to community groups, I say free software. I also mean open data. I also mean Creative Commons. These are all free culture communities. So how do we bring that to the medical device community? Well, Obviously, like there's open hardware out there, right? So that's what we're talking about here too. But I think there's some special things about medical communities that I want to explore, and I am exploring with Public Invention and Rob Reed about can we improve on what open hardware is doing. But there are some key principles you need to bring to any free culture community, right? Where you have to be giving away valuable knowledge, right? So it's not just giving away any knowledge, but we want to give somebody something valuable. So if you feel like you have an idea that's really important, if you're in a free culture community, you're giving that really important thing away. It's not about holding on to it because it's important, and that's the reason you're sharing. We're also going to try and make it low risk or low cost for other people to use it, right? So so there should be no rent seeking, right? You don't have to pay a fee, but we also want to make people feel comfortable using it, right? That they don't have a lot of restrictions or things that they might get tripped up on. Very often I come across licenses that people try to say that they're free software licenses or open source licenses, but they're really complicated to comply with, sometimes by design. Well, that's not free culture, right? Because we're setting a trap for people who are using it. That's not actually user freedom. Well, you can do this as long as you follow these complicated things, just hire a lawyer to make sure you're safe. That's a lot of risk, right? So we want to lower the risk for when people get it here, right? When someone has a medical device, and if they're a patient or if they're a doctor, we want them to have the freedom to use it in a way that's going to help that patient and not worry about, oh, did I break this contract? Did I break this agreement? Is someone going to sue me? Do I owe money around it? So low risk, low cost. And then the two really important parts here that make a free culture community work is, I was fixing a typo when you kicked it over to me, so I screwed up the formatting. The only demand that we're going to have, right, because there's always a cost, right? So I want to be really clear about this. The only cost that you can really ask for is participate in a free culture community is for other people to share their improvements, not with you, but with other people, right? So it's more of a pay it forward principle, right? Because if I have an agreement with Patrick that we're going to share our super secret special knowledge, right? And I'm sure Patrick has fantastic ideas. I'd love to hear all of them. But if we just share it with each other, I mean, how much value are we getting out of it, right? But if my demand to Patrick is, Patrick, I've got this fantastic idea and I'll share it with you and you can make improvements around it. The only thing I'm asking you to do is that when you make improvements around it, you share it with other people, right? That's how you grow the community. That's how you act charitably. It's not for me. It's not for me as the inventor. It's not for me as the developer. It's for the end users. It's for the patients. It's for students who are studying in classrooms. Right. The other really important principle we want to think about when we're building these communities is we're prioritizing integrating other contributions back into the project or into the commons, right? Because if I'm just working on my own idea in a silo and then someone else has access to it and they go build their own silo, okay, well now two people are doing independent things, but it's not an efficient way to share. So things like the Cosmic Collective, right, where you guys are coming together as a group, you're building off of each other, right? Like that's how we're creating a culture. That we're interacting with each other, we're each contributing a little bit. And I heard someone earlier say, like, it's amazing what other people know, and I can bring my little bit of knowledge and someone else can bring it there. The company I work at, the management team, we always say, like, we're hiring people who are smarter than us, right? Like, that's how we make a good company. That's how we build good communities, is interacting with people who are smarter with us and sharing, not forking and not siloing. So that's really what we're motivated around. We want to build a free culture community around medical devices. How do we achieve those two things? So one particular idea that I'm exploring now with Public Invention and Rob Reed is like, how do you make a really strong medical device license or agreement that encourages this, right? And this is really playing off the idea of share alike or copyleft. Is there some share alike or copyleft principle that we could bring to medical device communities? Classically, this is a really hard problem. Classically, for the last 20 years since open hardware has existed, this is a really hard problem because open hardware licenses aren't really licenses, they're contracts. And it's really easy to evade entering into a contract. So you really don't have a lot of leverage. When you put your open hardware designs up on the internet and anyone can download them, did they enter into agreement by downloading it? There are so many escape clauses there. And what are you going to ask for? Because you really don't have a lot of leverage around that space. Free software, on the other hand, really have the advantage of copyright licenses happen automatically. They give you really strong rights, and they're actually pretty much global. There's a lot of consistency internationally about copyrights. And I think that's why the free software community works so well, is that free software developers, open source developers could say, I have a huge amount of rights here that I could use to exclude people, but instead I'm going to flip it on its head, and I'm going to use those rights to draw people in. And that was the strength that helped them build such a large and successful community, to the point where we kind of changed how the IT industry worked. Or, I mean, I'm not that old, but people who are a little bit older than me and changed how the IT industry worked. Patents are another way, another form of intellectual property that people often point to for hardware. And everyone who's involved in open hardware, I feel like as soon as they get into, like, if only we can get patents, we could use patents to do what we did with copyrights. The only problem is, you know, patent attorney in the United States will tell you, like, it costs about $100,000 to get a patent. So where are you going to get that $100,000 to patent this one device? How many devices are going to create? Hopefully not one. I mean, this could be a huge amount of money. And then what are you going to do with that? Are you going to start charging fees so you can pay for the next patent, so you can rent it? Are you going to spend all your time raising charities? It's not a simple thing to get $100,000, and it's not a simple thing to get a patent either. And there's a limited number of things that you can patent. Despite what you see in the news, you can't patent everything, even though some people try. But do you really want to do that? I don't think you really do, and it's not great if you're trying to make an open source tractor or make an open source table or make an open source oxygen concentrator. Are you really doing something new and patentable in that space, or are you just making it easier for people to do things that already exist? That might not even be an option. There are things called database rights, sui generis database rights, which if you're in the world of device manufacturing, hardware manufacturing, or medical devices where you have patient data, there's lots of test data going around. So yeah, there's some of that stuff going around, but they don't exist everywhere in the world. And how hard is it to recreate it? How valuable is it? How hard is it for someone to just reproduce what you're doing? It's probably not that hard. And if you're in the United States, those don't exist. If you're in the EU, maybe they do, but it's not exactly the global nature that we'd be looking for to really get a global community. The thing that's really interesting about medical devices is that some attorneys think of medical device approval as a form of intellectual property because it's so hard to get medical device approval. Once you have the right to sell or manufacture something or to license it to other people, you have at least, if not a monopoly, a very limited number of competition, so you have a lot of market power. And what Rob and I are exploring inside of Public Invention is can we take what copyleft did to copyrights? Can we bring that to medical device approval licenses, somehow interact with the approval process and kind of flip that process on its head? So instead of using that to get a unique right where we can distribute devices, we can actually kind of force it open so that more people can participate in the process, and we can drive down the cost of medical devices and ultimately result in end users and doctors having more freedom around medical devices, right? While at the same time building a community on the front end. So takeaways around this, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Patrick, right, is that if you're trying to bring free culture to any community, really your focus needs to be on maximizing user freedoms, not developers, not inventors, not you, it's the other people. Who are you trying to help? What can you do to maximize their freedom? That's the number one you should be looking for. Avoid rent seeking, no matter what that is. Certainly it's looking for people to pay you money, but it's also for even getting like requiring people to contribute back to you. It's not about getting people to share back to you, it's getting people to share back to the commons, right? So how do you encourage them to pay it forward, right? It's saying, once you share this with other people, you can't stop other people from sharing it further on, right? So push that information forward, don't pull money back towards you. And then the thing that I'm interested in right now, like I said, is how can we copyleft medical device approval? How can we inject enough valuable information into the medical device approval space that we can use those rights to change how that industry is working, so that large companies might look at what we're doing and say, oh, that's actually really valuable. How do we contribute to those communities? And we might be able to get some for-profit entities looking at this going like, oh, actually, it's in our interest to support these kind of efforts, working with charitable contributors where we're improving access to medical device knowledge.
Thanks so much. If that's the end, I would love to turn it over and have a bit of Q&A back and forth, if you're open to that for the next couple minutes. And then we can sort of formally wrap it up and move into a kind of informal section. But yeah, I would like to open it to the audience. I think if there are some contributors that have questions, I know I have a question as well in the back of my mind, but let's open it up.
Question: how do you prevent others from taking an open source idea and patenting it so they can personally benefit and thereby prevent the idea from growing?
I mean, you open source it. I mean, that's really the way it works, right? So a lot of that is about documentation trails and making it visible enough. So it was fairly common in the free software community. When I worked at the Software Freedom Law Center, we might have a client that would get subpoenaed in a lawsuit between two large companies, and they were suing each other over patent rights, right? And what they were really interested from our clients is like, and it was always software patents. They're interested in our clients. What did you do 20 years ago? Because if we can find evidence that 20 years ago, or even one day before, that this was already done, the patent's invalid, because patents are only for novel ideas, right? So if your idea isn't novel, you can't patent it. So if you're sharing your patentable idea in public, someone can't come along and take it and go and patent it because you already shared it in public, right? So that's the proof of it. So your defense would be, I patented this. I'm like, well, that's nice that you patented it, but I was already talking about that a year before you patented it, a week before you patented it, an hour before you patented it. So you didn't have the right to patent it. So your patent's invalid.
And what's the minimum kind of documentation that something is prior art? Like if there's a record of it on the internet, or if me and my buddy talked about it over coffee in Starbucks?
Yeah, so my first year as an attorney, I spent a lot of time digging through tar balls from 1983, looking to see if it had been done. I mean, the minimum amount of documentation is, can you produce evidence to a court that convinces them that had already been done? So it's not like there's some standard. You don't need 50 pages. You just have to show them like they didn't invent it, someone else invented it first. So it's a really amorphous standard, but it's also kind of low. So it has to be specific enough that it's the same thing. And the patent system really does encourage people to invent around it. But if you're saying, hey, I've been doing this for 5 years, you've been doing it for 5 years, there's no patent that's going to read on that. They might have a patent that reads on something else, but it can't read on the thing you've been doing for 5 years without their patent being valid.
So Mark, what about if you have your item or your idea recorded on blockchain? And I think that would be a pretty solid report. And that would be the end of needing any patents.
Yeah, sure. I mean, blockchain, I guess, helps everything. I mean, blockchain to me, right? And if someone's a blockchain expert in here, I'm very dismissive of the concept of blockchain. It's a publicly publicly cryptographically signed audit book, basically, right? That is not the standard that courts hold people to when it comes to evidence, right? Like it being on GitHub in the Git commit history for 10 years is fine. Like it being on the personal laptop of an employee of the Free Software Foundation from 20 years ago, where you sign an affidavit saying, I got it off this laptop and the date on the file was X, is also pretty good evidence. You don't need to put it on blockchain. Like I wouldn't go through extra effort doing about it. I mean, it's evidence, but so is like, honestly, Internet Archive, lawyers spend a lot of time going through the backlog on Internet Archive, a lot of time.
Yeah. Well, I'm expecting that to move forward and become much more ubiquitous and usable for this sort of thing.
I'm sure it will, right? I mean, if we can sell gifts on blockchain, I'm sure we can have evidence logs on blockchain too.
Right on.
I would love to, I think Philip might have a question next.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I really appreciate your talk and the expertise that you shared. I guess the emphasis on free culture is an interesting one because naturally with a medical device, there are atoms involved, or you have to create something. So I think our perspective at Cosmic is we want to we want to increase the equitable access to medical devices and do so by reducing the costs. And we feel that by making the designs freely available, that will incentivize more competition and ultimately bring down the cost of these devices. So a general comment on how important the free culture aspect is to an underpinning of the broader kind of open source software community and how that might tie back to our ambitions.
Yeah, so when I'm talking about freedom in this context, I mean, this is historical, and there's lots of vocabulary debates, as there is in any community, right? So when I'm talking about freedom in this context, I'm talking about free as in freedom, not free as in a puppy, not free as in a beer. It's more like free as in freedom, right? So it's about civil rights. So you're right, when you're talking about physical things, right? Like those are a rivalrous resource, right? So very often you find the effect of this, and actually like there's some really interesting antitrust cases on it. The effect of free software licensing drives the price to zero because copying software has essentially zero cost, right? So there's really no profit motivation in selling copies of free software. When you're going to talk about a physical device, right, like you can basically commoditize that physical device by making that knowledge publicly available because anyone can make it, right? Anyone with sufficient access to the manufacturing facilities can pick up and doing it. So you're creating a competition in that marketplace to drive those prices down, making fungible goods, making them a commodity. And that's how we're enhancing freedom. We're enhancing freedom for our patients to be able to enjoy longer lives, get better access to medical care, because we're removing this like monopolistic price hike that comes from trapping that knowledge.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. I think those were some fantastic questions. So thank you so much to Bruce, Philip, Paul, and thank you so much to you as well, Mark. I wanted to. We're about 5 minutes over our kind of half an hour tight timeline on these things, but are people interested in keeping going a bit longer? Maybe I'll ask Peter to end the recording now, and then we can kind of go into a more free-form discussion and potentially some breakout rooms. So thank you so much to everyone for attending, and this is the end of this month's Cosmic Symposium. Tune in next month. It'll be, I believe, yeah, and we're gonna have another interesting speaker next month. We just lined up Lori from Backpack EMR.
I think that's 2 months from now. We've got Victoria Jaka from OSMS, who will be speaking in April, and then we've got Lori in May.
Perfect.
Yeah,
I'm excited for both. Victoria Jaka's experience with OSMS